Welcome to The Moral Tightrope, Why Good People Sometimes Choose the Wrong Path. This is a topic that I'm really excited about, and I hope you are too. Before we get started, I want to take a minute to introduce myself and cover some quick housekeeping points. For those of you who don't know me yet, I'm Amelia Delphonse. I am a BCBA, and I co-founded Master ABA with my twin sister, Diana Kelly. Through Master ABA, we help BCBAs gain confidence in their skills so they can have a greater impact with their clients. Our focus is on ethical, compassionate, client-centered practices. This course is eligible for CEUs. You can earn one ethics CEU for completing this course, but you must watch the videos all the way to the end. There will be a short quiz for each lesson. There is also a one-question quiz in the Mission Accomplished lesson you must complete to receive your CEU certificate. Also in the Mission Accomplished lesson is information about how to update your BCBA number in your account. Please update your number before you complete the quiz. This will ensure that your certificate populates correctly. You can find your certificate by logging into your account on Master ABA Academy. Scroll all the way to the bottom of the sidebar menu on the left side of your screen and click on My Certificates. If for some reason you miss a step or have any trouble with your certificate, email us at support@masteraba.com. We're happy to help with anything you need. This course is eligible for CEUs. You can earn 1.5 ethics CEUs for completing this course, but you must watch the videos all the way to the end. There will be a short quiz for each lesson. There is also a one-question quiz in the Mission Accomplished lesson you must complete to receive your CEU certificate. Also in the Mission Accomplished lesson is information about how to update your BCBA number in your account. Please update your number before you complete the quiz. This will ensure that your certificate populates correctly. You can find your certificate by logging into your account on Master ABA Academy. Scroll all the way to the bottom of the sidebar menu on the left side of the screen and click on My Certificates. If for some reason you miss a step or have any trouble with your certificate, email us at support@masteraba.com. We're happy to help with anything you need. This course is broken up into 3 short lessons to make it easy for you to fit into your busy schedule. You can download the course notes and transcripts as well as workbooks, checklists, and other helpful resources in the Resources tab of each lesson. You can find citations for the different reports and articles that I discussed in the References tab of the corresponding lesson. The first lesson will cover an overview of fraudulent billing in the field of ABA. The second lesson will review factors influencing unethical billing by BCBAs, and the final lesson will provide some action steps BCBAs can take to reduce motivation for unethical billing. Before we dive in, I want to tell you a little bit about how I became so passionate about some of the work that we're doing. It all started with a blog back in 2017 that evolved into what I needed to stand up against a company who prioritized profit over individual clients. Before moving to Florida in 2019, I spent my career working for nonprofit organizations. I taught at preschool at a nonprofit childcare center. I taught for Head Start. I worked for a community mental health center, and I became the clinical director for the ABA section of a larger nonprofit organization. Although there were challenges with every role, the number one priority for all these organizations was the care of the children and families. In fact, when I took over the role of clinical director for the ABA program for the large nonprofit, they were providing services free of charge for 4 children whose authorizations had expired because the previous BCBA failed to submit for reauthorization. They provided the service because it wasn't the family's fault the authorizations were expired. They did it because it was the right thing to do for the families. It was not a good financial move as 2 of the children were receiving 30 hours per week of services. They were paying staff for a total of 100 hours of work per week that the company wasn't being reimbursed for. Can you imagine any other ABA company doing this? In 2019, I moved to Florida and took a job as a clinical director for a large for-profit ABA company. During the interview, they sold me on the job by saying that it was a lot like owning your ABA company and with the support of the administrative team. I could focus on the clinical aspects of the center. It sounded perfect. I would be close to family and finally be warm. Working for that company, I had to make a lot of adjustments. We no longer paid staff for just being at the clinic. They only got paid for time with clients. This was a completely new idea for me, since at the nonprofit, we not only paid staff for their entire shift, whether they had a client or not, but we also paid for their 30-minute lunch break. At the nonprofit, we primarily serve clients with Medicaid, but with the for-profit company, I was told to bring on clients with private insurance first, before the clients who had Medicaid, even if they had been on the wait list longer. The nonprofit had grown from 26 clients to over 100 in just 2.5 years, so I was familiar with how to grow a clinic, but I had a real problem with bypassing clients with Medicaid. These are often the clients who need the services the most and who have the fewest resources. Among many other adjustments I had to make to adapt to the for-profit world, the final straw came when I started receiving a report every month that told me exactly how much money each client brought into the clinic. This was based on the number of direct service hours, supervision, parent training, and the rate that the insurance paid for each code. The first time I saw the report, I just stared at it. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. Personally, I will not make clinical decisions based on a report like this. It also doesn't change my decisions about which clients to bring into the clinic. With the clinic in New Hampshire, we were able to grow from 26 clients to over 100 in just 2.5 years and become the part of the nonprofit that generated the most revenue without a report like this. I just couldn't take it, so I left. I left the job that provided my family with insurance and financial stability. I left my role as a leader in an organization. I'm not suggesting that this is the right decision for everyone, but it was for me. I doubled down on growing my own business to supplement the income I was earning working as a part-time independent contractor for a nonprofit organization an hour away from where I lived. And 6 months later, my career shattered. The nonprofit that I had agreed to work with sold the ABA portion of their organization to a for-profit company that was infinitely worse than the company I left 6 months earlier. The management in this company was encouraging BCBAs to exaggerate the behaviors and deficits of their clients so they could get more hours. The owner of the company, an occupational therapist, sent an email out to all of the ABA staff, including RBTs, threatening to take away everyone's benefits because the ABA portion of the business wasn't making enough money. He told the RBTs that they were the ones working to pay the high salaries of the BCBAs. There's more, but you're not here to listen to those details. I knew I had to leave, but how could I leave my clients in the hands of these people? Over the next 1.5 years, I helped most of my clients find other services and ultimately left to work for other companies that had policies that I found unacceptable. One company limited supervision to 5% of the client's direct hours. That amounted to 1 hour of supervision for every 20 hours the RBT worked with the client. Another company would not provide fewer than 30 hours per week of services, and another found a code that would theoretically cover some of my planning time and insisted that I request hours for the code. Maybe some of you have experienced these requirements from the companies you've worked with. I don't know about you, but it made me want to give up on the field. Some of you might believe that these policies are standard practice, which makes them okay. Keep in mind that ABA is an individualized service and companies should not dictate any part of your treatment recommendations. When companies create these policies, they are looking out for the bottom line, not the client. My intention is not to shame companies for trying to make a profit. We live in a society where profit rules, but profit at the expense of clients and staff is where I draw the line. The ABA company in New Hampshire that I talked about earlier earned revenue that far exceeded its expenses, but we did it while making sure our staff felt supported and we were meeting the individual needs of the clients. Keep in mind that while I was looking for a company that aligned with my values, I was asked countless times why I didn't start my own ABA company. But that just wasn't the type of business I wanted to run. I didn't want to deal with payroll or credentialing. My business building Master ABA gave me the freedom to persist in finding a company that aligned with my values. I was able to keep trying when someone else would be forced to choose a steady income over their values. But that's why I'm so passionate about uncovering the reasons why ABA companies create these policies and empowering BCBAs to stand up against them. BCBAs come to me regularly asking for advice about dealing with these types of situations. So today I want to talk about why ABA has developed a reputation for unethical billing and what you can do to protect yourself and your career. Let's start by defining some important terms for this conversation. There are three main categories of inappropriate billing that occur: misunderstanding rules, unethical behavior, and fraud. Misunderstanding the rules is what it sounds like. It's a misinterpretation of the billing rules as established by the payer. There is no intent to deceive or misrepresent services provided, yet billing is still inaccurate. These types of misunderstandings most frequently occur when a BCBA decides to begin their own practice and is working with multiple different insurance companies who have different rules. Some of these rules can be confusing. An example might be a company or BCBA billing for a meeting with school staff when the insurance company doesn't cover coordination of care services. It's critical to understand all the rules for each payer you work with. The rules can vary widely and could change frequently. Each payer publishes their rules and makes them available online. Ignorance of the rules does not make you exempt from having to follow them. You are liable for any billing errors you make, regardless of whether you know about the rule or not. Misunderstanding of billing rules may include making errors in regard to the intent of the billing code, bundled service, qualified healthcare professionals as defined by the payer, and the location of services. Many of the examples I provided about my experiences after moving to Florida, I would classify as unethical behavior. Unethical behavior can be defined as actions that violate moral principles or professional standards, even if they may not be illegal. The BACB provides the ethics code for behavior analysts as a guide. It's up to the individual BCBA to not only interpret the intent of the code, but also apply it to real-world situations that may not always be black and white. We will discuss the ethics code more in the next lesson, including why having a code does not always ensure that people choose ethical behavior over unethical behavior, even when they know the potential consequences. Here are some examples of unethical behavior that BCBAs may feel pressured to engage in: providing services without proper supervision or training, providing less supervision than they deem appropriate, or providing services despite a conflict of interest. One of the examples I gave earlier is an example of fraud. Fraud is intentional deception with the aim of gaining an unfair advantage or benefit, often at the expense of another person or entity. The example of management staff telling BCBAs to exaggerate their clients' challenging behavior is fraud. It's intentionally misrepresenting their clients' needs for monetary gain. This behavior violates the ethics code and the law. There are consequences for these types of behaviors, but these consequences are not enough to prevent the behavior from occurring. Here are some examples of fraud: billing for services not provided, inflating service duration, submitting claims under a different provider, or providing services by a non-qualified service provider. None of you got into the field and planned to engage in any of these behaviors, and most of you, I'm sure, avoid them. But there are conditions that could arise where even ethical BCBAs feel justified or pressured into engaging in these behaviors, and that's what we will get into in the next lesson. The difference between misunderstanding and unethical behavior is intent. Misunderstanding the billing rules does not excuse you from the act of billing inappropriately, and you can be held responsible for any events that were billed inaccurately. The difference between unethical behavior and fraud revolves around the legality of the behavior. When a BCBA or ABA company engages in an intentional act of deception for financial gain, that's an illegal act. Generally, unethical behavior is a bit subjective, although the BACB provides us with some robust ethical guidelines. Unethical behavior may not be technically illegal. Fraudulent behavior is objectively wrong. At times, the line between fraud and unethical behavior can blur, and we aren't going to get into all the nuances. I just want to make sure we are all on the same page about these terms before we move on. Before we discuss the factors that make fraudulent billing happen, I want to talk about the prevalence of fraud in some of the cases that have been brought against ABA companies in recent years. It's difficult to determine the exact number of fraudulent billing cases in ABA prosecuted in the United States during recent years due to the lack of centralized data collection and reporting. I'm in Florida, and before moving here, I had heard rumors that there was a lot of fraud in the field here. I was still living in my happy little nonprofit bubble when I arrived and was shocked to see how widespread the issue really is. In a report by the Attorney General and Florida's Association for Healthcare Administration for the 2020 to 2021 fiscal year, there were 79 providers whose contract with Medicaid was terminated due to, quote, factors that are of a program integrity nature, end quote. In addition, there were another 14 ABA providers who were prevented from enrolling or re-enrolling as a Medicaid provider due to findings during an on-site pre-enrollment visit, criminal background screening, or due to federal exclusion. That's 93 ABA providers who Florida Medicaid found were engaging in unethical or fraudulent billing practices in 1 year. These numbers represent just a small portion of the total numbers for the field, since they are only from Florida's Medicaid program and only the providers who have been caught engaging in these behaviors. If you extend this out to the rest of the payers and throughout the United States, that's a serious number of ABA providers engaging in concerning billing practices. Some ABA companies have been reported as referring to billing fraud as a, quote, victimless crime, since it's the insurance companies who are footing the bill. Have you seen this on social media? I have. The reality is that we all pay for these services. The insurance companies get the money to pay for the services from taxpayers and premiums we pay. This money doesn't come from some magical place. Have you experienced a significant increase in your health insurance premiums? I know I have. Fraud isn't exclusive to Florida. It's happening across the United States, and new cases are being brought to the court often. Let's take a quick look at 4 big cases that have happened recently. I will link to all of the articles in the resources tab of the lesson if you're interested in learning more about these cases. The first one I want to talk about happened in Massachusetts in 2022. A BCBA and licensed mental health counselor was charged with Medicaid false claims and larceny over $1,200 for falsifying claims for ABA services that were never provided. The article also discussed related fraudulent billing for personal care attendant services that were also never provided. According to the article, these services could not have been provided as the client was either in an inpatient hospital or incarcerated during the time that the claims were made. Obviously, we can't provide services when an individual is in an inpatient facility or incarcerated unless you're working for the hospital or the prison, which this man was not. This is a clear case of fraud that's easy to prove, but not all of them are that easy. In February 2023, Applied Behavior Center for Autism in Indiana and its owner, Sherry Michael, was forced to repay $2 million due to fraudulent claims. These claims included billing concurrently for BCBA and behavior tech, upcoding the behavior tech services, billing for group services which are not covered by the payer, billing for individual services when group services were provided, billing for services that had already been paid for by third-party sources such as Medicaid. This is a long list of inappropriate billing activities. Anyone responsible for billing for a company must understand the rules for each payer they work with. Some payers will allow for concurrent billing of supervision, but most do not. Some allow for group services with prior authorization. What are the chances that this amount of services were billed due to a misunderstanding? Do these actions appear to be unethical or fraud? If you said fraud, you're right. This next case was in Florida in March of 2023. A behavior technician billed for more than $119,000 for services that she did not provide. The behavior tech colluded with parents of 2 young children. She would arrive at the home, log into an app to verify that the session occurred, turn off the GPS function on her phone, then leave the house. She would return hours later to log out of the session. She gave the parents a kickback for going along with the deception. Many ABA companies that provide home-based services rely on technology to monitor the activity of their staff, but as this woman proved, there are ways around this type of technology. If you're the owner of an ABA company, how can you ensure that your staff are providing the services as they claim? The last case I want to look at occurred in October of 2023 and was again in Massachusetts. 2 ABA providers were forced to repay more than $2.5 million in fraudulent claims. The false claims for these 2 companies included billing for services not rendered or properly documented, not provided by individuals with the proper credentials for the services provided, or failing to provide adequate supervision to behavior technicians. I want you to think about the services you provide. How thoroughly do you document your sessions? How about your RBTs? Are there times when your schedule has made it difficult to provide sufficient supervision? Does the company you work for regulate any of these things in a way that makes it more difficult for you to meet the standards you feel are appropriate? One of the companies I considered working with as an independent contractor limits RBT supervision to 5% of the client's direct hours. That amounts to 1 hour for every 20 hours of direct services. I'm not going to cite the document this came from, as I want to protect the privacy of the company that created it. I had a strong opposition to this policy when it was first presented to me. When providing in-home services, what are the chances that the RBT will feel supported and you will be able to observe enough of the learner's behavior to be meaningful? The company was owned by 2 BCBAs who claimed it was based on the BACB's recommendations, but it was actually based on their minimum requirement for RBT supervision. Yes, this is the minimum standard for an RBT to maintain certification, but they held strong to the policy when I made the argument that this wasn't the BACB's recommended dosage for case supervision. Interestingly, the company provided a variety of different resources on their website that included the Council of Autism Services Providers resource manual titled Applied Behavior Analysis Treatment of Autism Spectrum Disorder, Practice Guidelines for Healthcare Funders and Managers. This manual was originally published by the BACB, but was transferred to CASP in 2020. In this manual, the recommendations for supervision is 20% of direct service hours depending on the complexity of the case. The key is that the recommendation is dependent on the complexity of the case, not by a rigid standard. In the end, the decision for treatment dosage should be in the hands of the BCBA who assesses the case. The BCBA is responsible to meet the standards of the insurance company who pays for the service, as well as the needs of the individual client and behavior technician. Have you looked at the policies for each payer you work with? Do you know what their requirements are for supervision? Most companies leave this up to the discretion of the BCBA, but some do have a minimum requirement. Think back to the case where the RBT colluded with parents to bill for services that were not provided. If there was adequate BCBA supervision and parent training on that case, do you think this could have been prevented? By the way, I refused to take any cases from the company that had the supervision policy. They stated that I could ask for a review of individual cases to be approved for a higher level of supervision. I decided that I could not support a company with these types of values. None of us go into this field with the expectation that we are going to engage in these types of behaviors. I'm sure that all of you started your journey because you were intrigued by the science and you wanted to help people. I'm sure that's true for the people involved in the cases we discussed, as well as the BCBAs who created the policy I found completely unacceptable. So what changed for these people? Somewhere the contingencies shifted that provided more reinforcement for these behaviors. That's what we are going to talk about in the next lesson. Then in the final lesson, we will cover strategies that you can use to protect your own contingencies and ensure your values stay strong.